discuss what fracking is and why it is important. I also went into some of the concerns with fracking, like with the fracking fluid, and some of the chemicals that were used in fracking and why they were harmful. I'm going to go deeper into the discussion of these concerns with fracking. Fracking is harmful for society and the environment because of the chemicals in the fluid and how they dispose of the flowback fluid or the fluid that returns from the surface, and where it ends up, where the fracking fluid ends up, and some of the laws and loopholes that some companies try and go around to allow their fluid to be disposed of. And there's also a new method of fracking, and this is a type of gas fracking that doesn't require water or chemicals. The world is getting ahead of itself with this newer technology to harvest natural gas. Not everything has been thought out and planned for. Some people argue that fracking is a waste of water. The world is already concerned about their depleting freshwater supply, so their concerns are valid. According to Kelly Fisher of Boston College Environmental Affairs, of the more than 750 known chemicals used, more than 100 cause disturbances in the endocrine system. Health complaints from people living nearby include headaches, nosebleeds, stomach pain, and extreme fatigue. Some tested positive for exposure to harmful chemicals. To help you get an idea of some of the chemicals used in fracking, I'll name some of the more common ones and their effects on the population. The first one is hydrochloric acid. It is corrosive to eyes and the skin. Ammonium chloride, if it is ingested, it is potentially fatal. Citric acid, which it's naturally occurring in the body, but if you get too much, you can overdose, which can be fatal. And there's potassium hydroxide, which medical attention is needed if you come into contact with this, and it can be fatal in large amounts. Documentaries show that tap water discoloration, the emission of unnatural odors, and flammable water in regions where fracking takes place. The fluid that returns to the surface can be just as toxic, if not more, than the fluid that was first injected. Flowback can contain heavy metals, compounds that evaporate at room temperature, and natural materials that are radioactive. The most common way of disposing of this fracking fluid is to dig an identical well and drill that back into the earth. Considering no long-term studies have been done to see the effects of these chemicals on the environment, it is not a good idea to pump these back down into the ground, where it is impossible to retrieve it. It could be possible that long-term exposure causes the chemicals to increase the number of cracks in the ground to a dangerous number that could weaken the ground. Fracking has become exempt from many of the rules and regulations put in place to stop these kinds of harmful activities. The RCRA, which is the Resource and Recovery Conservation Act, regulates hazardous wastes. Laws of the RCRA do not include water generated from oil and gas operations. This includes fracking. Because of this, the EPA cannot regulate the chemicals used in fracking operations. Another organization that controls, sort of like with the EPA, is the Clean Air Act. They regulate the release of pollutants into the air from stationary and mobile sources. A stationary source would be like an oil well, and a mobile would be such as just a vehicle emitting carbon dioxide and stuff from the exhaust. Fracking companies have no obligation to look into the effects and prevention of leaking gas because they are exempt from the laws of the Clean Air Act. Does the government not think that if they have to bend the rules for a process to obtain energy, that it is not a good process? The drilling and extraction of natural gas results in the leaking of methane gas, a potent greenhouse gas that is 25 times more stronger than carbon dioxide. Greenhouse gases are already wreaking havoc on our ecosystem. Current fracking methods use trillions of gallons of water. This water cannot be reused. This method is similar to the current method of fracking, except liquefied propane is used. This liquefied propane turns into vapor and can be reused and resold, unlike the chemical-laced water. According to Nearing and Brino of Albany Times, this method uses 1/4 the number of truck trips. Impact on local roads, noise, and dust annoyance to neighbors are reduced. Propane costs are more initially, even though it can be reused, resold once recovered. Current fracking methods have no advantage over the propane method other than cost. Harmful chemicals would no longer be used. It would be just a liquefied propane. Chemicals that are potentially lethal are no longer used. The liquid propane vapor can be reused and resold, unlike the chemical-laced water, which must be disposed of. Trillions of gallons of water will no longer be used. No longer must chemical-laced water be dealt with. The environment and society no longer are threatened by fracking. Current fracking should be halted until this new method is tested and ready. And this is my audience.